about OU football. Shocker there, right? Shocker. RJ wants to talk about OU. Yes, make your jokes, please. Make your jokes. But I want to talk about it from the standpoint of one Lincoln Riley, who just remains tremendously optimistic about the prospect of college football this season. And he's got good reason to believe that after a second round of COVID-19 test among his players revealed no new positive test cases. Now, when the Sooners returned to campus to begin voluntary workouts, 14 players tested positive. Appropriate quarantine measures were taken and medical care given. Since then, the Sooner bubble has not burst. Now, OU awaits a season it hopes it's allowed to play a week earlier than scheduled. Last week, OU athletic director Joe Castiglione told the Oklahoman that his athletic department is seeking a waiver to play Missouri State on August 29th rather than September 5th. The extra week gives OU another week of COVID cushion and a sensible 2 weeks off between games with Tennessee and Army in September, as the Big 12 is one of the remaining conferences who have yet to make a decision that affects the number of games played this season for each member school. While the Big Ten and Pac-12 have each announced they will move to a conference members only schedule for the 2020 season to cut travel and possible COVID-19 infection while cutting logistics to become more nimble in scheduling through their prospective and respective league offices, the Big 12 is still looking to keep as many games on its team schedule as possible. This decision to not make a decision until absolutely necessary is why Riley told ESPN he expects to coach football games this fall or next spring, saying, quote, "I just can't imagine a scenario where we don't explore every option to play. Whether it's something we do in the fall, whether it's a shortened season, whether it's spring, there's nothing we should take off the table. Regardless of what we have to do, I don't think there's anything we can't work around and we can't adjust and we can't make work in order to play college football. We've all got to do our part on that." The health and safety of his players is paramount, and he told ESPN he's aware of how difficult the needle is to thread if there's college football played at all this fall. However, his team is preparing like they will face the Bears to open the season and continue to follow the guidelines and policies put forth by the athletics department and medical personnel the university is asking to lead them. The issue might not be in Riley's control, though, as Castiglione, Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlesby, and other decision makers around the country patiently await updates on positive numbers, testing protocols, data, and opinions of epidemiologists and medical doctors around the country and across the globe to help put an end to this pandemic. In truth, so are we all. But that also brings into question for me, if nothing is off the table, when do you have to start removing things from the table? Because the Pac-12 and Big Ten have begun that process. And the Big Ten makes more money than any other league in the country, even more than the SEC. Now that changes once the SEC's rights deal with ESPN kicks in, but for the time being, they make more than anybody else. I also wonder this. We are going to get out of this. Whether or not we get out of it in January or we get out of it this time next year, we're going to get out of this. Right? Especially after the hope given to us yesterday with the study performed by the National Institute of Health across 30,000 cases in younger folks. I wonder if the Big 12's play and its trying to thread this needle has anything to do with trying to grow its pie at a time when somebody else might be shrinking. Let me walk this out. If the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are both just playing 10 games, that means there are 2 games per team that are not being played. So 2 times 10 is 20, times 2 is 40. It's 40 games, right? And if you take a look at some of the payouts that are going to have to happen for some of these schools to, recoup some of the money that they'd be losing, right? Like North Dakota State with Oregon and Towson with Maryland. You come to find out how much money is really here. Now, there's some force majeure stuff in here, which means that, they can say, hey, look, pandemic, we don't have to pay you, to which smaller schools would be like, no, you're just broke. It's not the pandemic. If you pay me. And then they'll settle on a lower amount than the payout was supposed to be so that they can get that game back in like 2035 or whatever. So there were 114 FCS teams that were supposed to play FBS games in 2020. Among them, Hampton at Old Dominion, even though Hampton has canceled its fall season. So I wonder if they're going to be able to recoup that $190,000 that they were supposed to get from Old Dominion, right? You also had Norfolk State at Charlotte. Remember, Charlotte is in Conference USA. That game was $275,000, right? You had Prairie View A&M at La Tech. That game's $350,000. UC Davis at Nevada, still on for the time being. That's $375,000. As we get into the higher ranges, right? We're talking about Eastern Washington at Florida. That was a game I actually really wanted to see because Eastern Washington is one of the better FCS teams in the country, and Florida is expecting to compete for conference championship, if not a national championship this year. That game is worth $750,000 to Eastern Washington. They can't play it anymore, right? Montana State at Utah. That game's worth $675,000 to Montana State. They can't play it anymore. Cal Poly at Cal. It's worth $625,000. They can't play it anymore. East Tennessee State at Georgia. It's worth $550,000. They can't play it anymore. Portland State at Arizona. It's worth $550,000. They can't play it anymore. Abilene Christian at Texas A&M, $500,000. James Madison at North Carolina, a game James Madison probably could win, $500,000. North Dakota State at Kansas State. Wow, that was going to be fun. $475,000 that we still might be able to get. I say it was going to be fun. I hope it's still fun. Because I know now more than ever, North Dakota State wants that game. And you know what? Kansas State probably wants that game too. South Dakota at Iowa State. They get to beat up on the Coyotes for $475,000, right? The Citadel at Clemson, $450,000. And on it goes. Point here being, they're going to pay out some of that money, if not all of that money, across all of these schools, right? If the ACC decides to do what the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are doing, you got a problem, okay? You got a problem that needs to be solved. But if you're the Big 12 and you're the SEC and you are willing to hold up against the political pressure and optics that you might be up against to try to get these games in and to try to play something like your season, you make up some of the ground on some of these teams and some of these leagues where everybody's losing money. Because we've all been very critical of the Big 12 being just a 10-team league, playing a round-robin schedule that ensures you only get one team into the playoff if you get that one team into the playoff. And because Oklahoma has always benefited from its tradition in years where you might look at an Oregon or you might look at an Iowa State and say they got a similar case there. Oklahoma gets the nod. If it was a 14-team league, you probably get an opportunity to get two teams in there, and perhaps you're able to bolster your league with more money. Problem that we've run into with the Big 12 is member schools do not want to get a smaller portion of money. So you're going to have to make it a bigger portion of money and bring in more revenue so that everybody gets paid a little bit more. So those payouts are closer to $40 million as opposed to $36 million for a Kansas, or $50 million as opposed to $45 million for Oklahoma and Texas, right? And we could talk about how the Longhorn Network kind of torpedoed all of this and ESPN Plus versus the Big Ten Network and how it works, because we can. But the opposite of that is the Pac-12, where Larry Scott might get fired even as he has contracted the Rona because his Pac-12 network is so crappily run that they only reach 18 million viewers. Heck, man, there are more viewers than that in Northern California, let alone Oregon, let alone Washington, and on it goes. And I say nothing of when your games are played. So for once, I think perhaps Bob Bowlesby is trying to be very quiet because he sees an opportunity here. That is the business approach to this. Now, what that means in relation to human life and human exposure, I've done those segments, right? And I will continue to do those segments. But right now, I wanted to talk about the money and I want to talk about this league because I get tired of covering this podunk conference from time to time, okay? I get tired of talking about how much better it is elsewhere when really this problem is of our own making. Like there's one good team, maybe two good teams in the Big Ten, maybe, and they play in the same division. You know, we're really talking about Oklahoma, Ohio State and Penn State. Michigan can't be trusted. Whiskey can't be trusted to win anything but the division. You know, like you should be able to compete with them. With Oklahoma and Texas. With Texas Christian, who just picked up Marcel Brooks, right, to go along with Zach Evans. With Baylor, who has shown that Art Briles and no Art Briles don't figure it out. With an Iowa State that is churning. I feel so terrible for them right now because Jamie Pollard wrote it down in crayon for us. Look, man, we're going to lose nearly $100 million already. Imagine if we don't play football. If we don't play football, we're screwed. And that was in a year where Brock Purdy was pushing to be the best quarterback in this league, where Matt Campbell had beat Texas last year in Ames. Huge victory for them in that fan base. And he was just a misread away from beating Oklahoma in Norman for the second time in a row. People forget that, man. Like, Brock Purdy threw to the wrong tight end. He throws to the right guy. We're talking about another W for Iowa State, and Oklahoma's got no shot to get in the playoffs. They won that game 42-41. Everybody's got skin in this game. I'm saying now that we know what the Big Ten is going to do, now that we know what the Pac-12 is going to do, and we're over the shock and awe of it, taking a look at the chessboard, there's a move for the Big 12 to make here. It's just about whether or not you want the financial gain or the human loss. Because you're going to have one or the other, probably both.